My daughter turned 10 last week. She sat by the front door for nearly 9 hours, wearing the sparkly pink dress she picked out herself, her hair done up in the way her father used to like, holding the gift she made for him out of construction paper and glitter glue. She waited and waited. Every time a car passed the house, she stood up straight, hopeful. Her little face would light up for a second, then drop when the car didn't stop. He promised. He told her, "This year, baby girl, I'll be there this time, 3 p.m. sharp." By 8:30, I couldn't take it anymore. The cake was melting. The candles had been lit and blown out twice, once by accident, once by wind. I walked over to her and said, "Come on, Mira. Let's blow out the candles together, just you and me." She looked up at me, and for the first time all day, her voice cracked. "Okay." We walked to the table. I lit the candles again. We held hands. She closed her eyes. Just as we leaned in, the doorbell rang. Mira froze. I felt it too, that impossible flicker of hope. She ran to the door. I followed right behind her, but when she opened it, it wasn't him. It was a stranger, a man I had never seen before, standing on our porch in a navy jacket, holding a wrapped gift and a letter. "Are you Janelle Ruiz?" he asked quietly. "I was asked to bring this today, for your daughter." I took the envelope from his hand. My fingers trembled before I even opened it, and when I read what was inside, I had to sit down. My legs couldn't hold me anymore, because the words in that letter changed everything I thought I knew about Mira's father, about the kind of man he really was, and what he left behind. I had been up since 5 that morning, not because I had to be, but because I couldn't sleep. Birthdays were always complicated in our house, especially Mira's. Her father had missed the last 2, and I didn't want to admit how hard I was hoping this one would be different. I stood in the kitchen, icing the cake I had baked the night before, vanilla with strawberries, her favorite. Mira had drawn the design herself, a rainbow over a sketch pad with the words, "double digits," in big, colorful letters. She was turning 10. She said it like it meant she was stepping into the world, becoming her own person. I could see it in her eyes, the way she stood taller, spoke more confidently, even picked out her own party dress a month ago, pink with little stars on the sleeves. She woke up around 7 and came into the kitchen still rubbing sleep from her eyes, but smiling. That bright, unstoppable smile she always had when her dad made a promise. He said 3 o'clock, right, Mama? I nodded. I didn't lie. That's what he said. She spun in a slow circle, her voice rising as she daydreamed aloud. "Do you think he'll bring it? The sketchbook from the art shop in New York?" She had mentioned it to him once on a phone call 3 months ago. He had said he'd try. "I'm sure he'll bring something special," I said, stirring the batter for cupcakes she'd take to school the next day. I kept my voice light, but my stomach was tight. Mira didn't eat much breakfast. She was too excited. By 9, she was already dressed and had moved her little chair to the front window. She sat there cross-legged, sketching in her old notebook, stopping only to look up every time a car passed. I watched from the hallway, pretending to be busy with decorations. I hung the birthday banner she made from string and cardstock. Each letter was colored by hand. She had even added "Welcome, Dad" in gold marker beneath the main sign. The house felt warmer with her laughter bouncing off the walls, but it also felt fragile, like one wrong word would cause everything to fall apart. That's how it always was with Damon. We had separated 3 years ago, officially at least. The truth is, he left us long before that, one broken promise at a time. At first, it was missed dinners, then holidays, then birthdays. But no matter how many times he let Mira down, she never stopped believing he'd change. She carried hope like it was stitched into her heart, and I let her, because I didn't have the strength to take it away. By noon, she had asked to set up the candles. "Just in case he's early," she said. She lined them up along the cake, counting them twice. I watched her from the doorway, her tiny fingers adjusting the last candle to make it perfectly straight. I made sure my phone was fully charged. I kept checking it for messages. Nothing. I didn't want to admit it, but I was waiting too. I hated myself for it. After everything Damon had put us through, I still held on to this sliver of hope that maybe he'd show up just once when he said he would, that maybe he'd surprise both of us. By 2, she was pacing. By 3, she was glued to the window. She kept saying, "Any minute now," and I kept replying, "I'm sure." Family members started calling. My sister, my mom, my cousin Laura. They wanted to sing happy birthday, see Mira's smile. They asked if Damon was coming. I told them I didn't know. I left the probably not part out. Mira didn't ask for presents that year. She didn't care about games or cake or balloons. She only wanted one thing. She wanted her dad to walk through that door and tell her he remembered, that she mattered. That was the hardest part of all. Watching her wait with that wide, hopeful grin, watching time crawl past while her face slowly changed from excitement to confusion, then to quiet disappointment. Still, she didn't complain. She didn't cry. She just kept sitting there, looking out the window, the sketch pad on her lap, the banner fluttering behind her every time the door opened and closed. And I stood behind her, powerless to fix what she didn't yet understand. By 3:15, I had lost count of how many times Mira stood up and sat back down. The sound of passing cars had turned into background noise, but she kept checking anyway. Her eyes followed each one with that same small flicker of belief. It hurt to watch. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to, pretending to wipe the counters, listening closely for the sound of a car door or footsteps on the porch. Nothing came. I checked my phone again. Still no text, no missed call. Not even a lousy voicemail. I stared at his name in my contacts for a long time, thumb hovering over the call button, before I shut the screen off. If he was coming, he would have been here by now. I peeked into the living room. Mira was still by the window, arms wrapped around her knees. The sketch pad had fallen to the floor beside her, forgotten. She wasn't drawing anymore. I walked over, knelt beside her, and touched her shoulder. "Hey, baby," I said softly. "Why don't we do cake now? We can still call Grandma and everyone," and she shook her head without looking at me. "Not yet." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were glassy. She wiped her nose with the sleeve of her dress and picked up the sketch pad again, though she didn't open it. "He said he'd be here, Mama. He told me on the phone. He promised." I nodded, not trusting my voice. It was nearly 4:30 when she asked if she could move a chair outside. I helped her carry it to the porch. She sat in it like she was guarding something sacred. She refused to take off the party hat I'd placed on her head earlier, even though it was starting to bend and lose shape. She kept the handmade birthday card she drew for her dad on her lap. I brought out a blanket as the wind picked up, tucking it around her shoulders like a shield. At one point, a delivery truck pulled into our neighbor's driveway. Mira stood up so fast the card flew from her lap. Her face lit up with such sudden joy that I caught my breath. She ran to the edge of the porch, craning her neck, hoping it was him, but it wasn't. She stepped back slowly, picked up her card, and sat down again without saying a word. By 5:30, she still hadn't moved. I brought her a slice of cake and set it on the porch railing. She didn't touch it. I sat with her then. I needed to be near her, even if I couldn't say the things I wanted to, that Damon wasn't coming, that he'd never intended to, that I didn't know what kind of man promised his child the world and then vanished like a ghost. "I think maybe he got stuck in traffic," she whispered. I didn't respond. I couldn't lie anymore. She glanced sideways at me. Or maybe his phone died, or maybe... I stopped her gently. "Mira." She looked up at me with wide, searching eyes. "It's not your fault," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Her lip trembled, and she nodded quickly like she wanted to believe me but couldn't fully take it in. She leaned her head against my arm, and I kissed her hair. By 6:45, the wind had picked up again. The candles we'd placed on the cake kept blowing out. I relit them twice. Mira had finally agreed to come inside, though her eyes stayed fixed on the front door. The guests we invited, mostly family and a couple of neighborhood kids, had long since gone home. Everyone said they understood, but I could hear the quiet pity in their voices. They meant well, but I hated it. I set the cake down on the table. The frosting was starting to melt around the edges. Mira stood behind her chair, holding onto it like it anchored her to the floor. I smiled, even though my chest was aching. "Ready to make a wish?" She stared at the 10 flickering candles. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Can I wait 5 more minutes?" I glanced at the clock. It was already 8:40. I didn't want to say yes. I didn't want to give her any more rope to hang her hopes on, but I nodded anyway. 5 more minutes, I said, because even after everything, I was still hoping too. It was 8:45 when I finally made the decision. Mira was still holding on to the last thread of hope, and I could see that thread fraying. She stood quietly beside the table, eyes locked on the 10 tiny flames flickering against the darkening windows. Her shoulders had sunk. Her lips were pressed tightly together, like she was holding in something that might shatter if she let it slip out. I reached for the lighter one more time and relit the 2 candles that had fizzled out. Then I looked at her. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "we waited all day. I think it's time we blow out your candles together." She didn't respond at first. Then she nodded once, slowly. Not because she agreed, but because she didn't have the energy left to argue. I could feel the weight in the room. All day we had balanced between hope and disappointment, and now it tipped. Mira walked over and sat down at the table without saying a word. She rested her hands in her lap and stared at the candles. I stood beside her and placed my hand on her back. "You can still make a wish," I said. "Wishes don't have to be about anyone else. They can be just for you." She looked up at me. "I don't want to wish for anything." I didn't push her. I just nodded and took a breath. "All right then. We'll just blow them out together." We counted to 3. She leaned forward. I followed. Right as we were about to blow, the doorbell rang. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a shout. Mira froze mid-breath. Her head snapped toward the door. She knocked her chair back, trying to stand up. The candles were forgotten. Her eyes were huge, full of something that had flickered all day but now sparked into full flame. "Mom, that's him. It has to be." She ran before I could say a word. I followed close behind her, heart pounding. I didn't want to move too quickly, but I couldn't stay still. Every part of me hoped and feared at the same time. What if it was him? What if it wasn't? Mira reached the door and flung it open, but it wasn't Damon. It was a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, neatly dressed, light brown hair with a streak of gray at the temple. He wore a navy jacket and held a medium-sized gift bag in one hand and a sealed white envelope in the other. His expression was calm, but his eyes softened when they landed on Mira. "Hi," he said gently. "Are you Janelle Ruiz?" I stepped forward and put a hand on Mira's shoulder. "Yes, that's me." "I was asked to deliver this today," he said, holding out the gift bag and envelope. "It's for your daughter." From Damon Ruiz. The name hit me like a slap. My breath caught, and I didn't reach for the envelope right away. "Who are you?" I asked. "My name is Kyle Bennett. I was a friend of Damon's. He asked me to bring this to your home today. He was very clear about the date and the time." Mira looked up at me, confused, her expression shifting between hope and uncertainty. "Is he coming?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle hesitated before shaking his head. "No, honey, he's not coming today." He handed me the envelope, and I finally took it. My fingers trembled. It was Damon's handwriting. I would have recognized it anywhere. "Thank you," I said, barely managing the words. Kyle nodded and gave Mira a small smile. "Happy birthday, Mira," he said quietly. "Your dad loved you very much." Then he turned and walked away, leaving us standing in the open doorway. I stared at the envelope. Mira clutched the gift bag to her chest like it held the answer to every question she hadn't dared to ask all day. We stepped back inside. I walked her to the couch, and we sat down together. I held the envelope in both hands, took a breath, and opened it. I unfolded the letter slowly, careful not to tear it. The paper was thick, smooth, the kind people use when they want something to last. Mira leaned in close, her small shoulder pressed against mine. She still hadn't opened the gift bag. Her eyes were fixed on the letter in my hands. At the top, in Damon's handwriting, were the words, "To my daughter, Mira, on your 10th birthday." I started reading aloud, my voice shaking. "Mira, I know today is your birthday, and if things were different, I'd be right there with you. I'd be handing you this gift myself. I'd be hugging you so tight your hair would stick to my sweater. But life didn't give me more time." I paused and looked down at her. Her hands were tight around the handles of the gift bag, her knuckles white. Her lips were parted, and she was staring straight ahead like she was trying not to blink. I kept reading. "I've been sick, Mira, for a while now. I didn't want you to see me like that, so I said nothing. I thought I had more time. But the truth is, when I made you that promise, I believed I could keep it. I believed I'd get better. I was wrong." My chest tightened. I had guessed something was wrong over the last year, but I didn't expect this. I didn't expect finality. Your mom is stronger than I ever was. She has carried you through things you should never have had to go through. Listen to her. Trust her. She will never lie to you. My voice cracked, but I kept going. Mira's eyes were filling with tears, but she didn't look away. This isn't a goodbye, Mira. I am with you in every drawing you make, every laugh that sounds like your mom's, every time you feel like no one sees how special you are. I see you. I have always seen you. I just didn't always know how to show it. I stopped reading. I couldn't go any further without my voice breaking completely. I handed her the letter, and she held it like it was a piece of treasure. For a long time, she didn't say anything. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't ask why he didn't tell her sooner. She just sat there, her eyes full and still. Finally, she whispered, "He's gone?" I nodded. "Yes, baby, he's gone." She opened the gift bag slowly. Inside was a hardbound sketchbook, the exact one she had asked for. Her name was embossed on the front in silver, Mira Ruiz. Tucked inside the front cover were 3 pages of drawings, each one done in Damon's familiar style. They weren't polished or perfect, but they were full of life. One showed the two of them holding hands with her birthday crown on her head. Another showed her sitting on a swing, looking up at the sky. The last was a self-portrait of Damon, smiling, holding a sign that read, "I'm proud of you." Mira touched the paper like she was afraid it might disappear. Her lower lip trembled, but she didn't look away. She ran her fingers over the lines of his sketch, then closed the book gently and held it against her chest. "I thought he forgot me," she said. I wrapped my arms around her. "He didn't forget. He just didn't know how to be what you needed. But I think in the end he tried." We sat there together on the couch. No music, no cake, just a quiet kind of grief that didn't need to be spoken. The kind that comes when the truth breaks your heart, but also sets something inside you free. Outside, the wind picked up. The candles on the cake had long since gone cold, but it didn't matter anymore. Mira whispered, "I want to draw now." She opened the sketchbook and turned to a blank page. I watched her pencil move across the paper, slow and steady like she was writing back. Mira filled that sketchbook faster than I ever imagined. Every evening after school, she would sit at the kitchen table, her head bent low, drawing with a focus that made the rest of the world feel far away. Sometimes she sketched memories. Sometimes she drew what she missed. And sometimes she just filled the pages with color, layer after layer, until the paper was heavy with it. She never asked why Damon hadn't told her sooner. She never blamed him out loud. But I could see the questions in her eyes during those first few weeks, especially when we passed by the park where they used to go or heard his name in a passing conversation. There were days when the sadness sat heavily on her chest, and I didn't try to pull it off. I just sat with her in the quiet, holding space until she felt strong enough to speak. One night, about a month after her birthday, I found her in her room holding the letter again. She had read it so many times that the folds were starting to soften and fray at the edges. She looked up and asked, "Do you think he really meant it? That he was proud of me?" I knelt beside her and met her eyes. "Yes," I said. "I think he meant every word." She nodded and didn't ask anything else. Grief, I've learned, doesn't always come in loud sobs or dramatic scenes. Sometimes it's in the small pauses, in the way she lingered before turning off the lights, in the drawings where his figure stood farther away than the rest, in the empty seat she left next to her during her school play. But slowly, gently, that grief softened. It didn't vanish, but it stopped cutting so sharply. She began talking about him again, not like a wound, but like a person she had known and loved and lost. A few weeks later, she brought her sketchbook to school for show and tell. She read the letter out loud to her class and told them, without tears, that her dad had been sick and that he loved her enough to send a message even when he couldn't be there. Her teacher called me after and said there wasn't a dry eye in the room. But what struck her most wasn't the sadness. It was Mira's strength, her clarity, the quiet confidence of a child who had found peace in truth. As for me, I wrestled with my own emotions. For years, I carried anger toward Damon like a weight. I blamed him for every missed recital, every bedtime story I had to read alone, every moment Mira asked me when he'd call next. I thought I had hardened to it, but reading that letter cracked something open in me too. He had made mistakes, big ones. He had failed her in ways I will never fully understand. But in the end, he did something right. He gave her what every child deserves, the truth, a message of love, and a final memory that wasn't abandonment. It was effort. It was presence, even if only through ink on paper. Sometimes I wonder what Damon would think if he saw Mira now. Not just her drawings, which have become more detailed and expressive with every page, but the way she walks into a room, the way she speaks up for herself, the way she lets herself be vulnerable without shame. I think he would be proud, and I think he would regret not being there to see it happen. On the day she finished the last page of the sketchbook, she handed it to me without a word. I flipped through the drawings, stopping on one near the end. It was of the two of us. We were sitting on the couch, our arms around each other, the letter in her lap. Above it, she had written, "I didn't get the birthday I wished for, but I got the one I needed." That night, we lit the 10 candles again, not because we were waiting on anyone this time, just because we wanted to. We blew them out together, not as two people hoping for someone to show up, but as a mother and daughter who had already learned how to keep going without him and how to let love stay anyway. Thank you for listening to our story. If it moved you, even a little, please take a second to like the video. It helps more people find stories like this. If you've ever waited on someone who didn't show up or found unexpected healing in the most surprising way, share your experience in the comments. I read every single one, and your words might help someone else feel a little less alone. Share this video with someone who might need it today. And if you want more true stories that speak from the heart and remind us of the strength we carry, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. From my family to yours, thank you for being here. The moment I stepped into that hospital room, I could feel the air leave my chest. My dad was alive, sitting up, the heart monitor beeping steadily beside him. But he didn't look at me. Not even a flicker of recognition. Not for me. Not for my son. Just an empty stare toward the television bolted to the corner of the room. I wanted to believe he didn't see us, that maybe he was groggy or confused from the medication. But deep down, I knew better. He saw us. And he chose not to care. It had been 3 years since we'd last spoken, 3 years since he shut the door on our relationship after my mother's funeral. He blamed me for everything that came after, for raising Noah alone, for not fixing my broken marriage, for not living the kind of life he approved of. And when my mother died, it was like he sealed off the last piece of himself that might have cared. Now here we were. Me. Standing in that sterile room, holding the hand of my 6-year-old son, who had never done anything to deserve being ignored like that, and my father cold as ever, pretending we weren't there. I told myself to stay calm, be the adult. Don't react, don't cry, just be there for Noah. I tried to focus on my son's soft fingers wrapped around mine. I could feel him squeeze my hand, then let go. Noah stepped forward. "Hi, Grandpa," he said in the softest, brightest voice. My dad didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't say a word. He just stared through us like we were ghosts. I felt my throat tighten. All those years of silence, and now this. After a stroke? After everything we'd already lost? I stood there, frozen, my mouth dry, trying to find something, anything to say that wouldn't make it worse. But I didn't have to. Noah reached into his pocket. I hadn't noticed him grab anything before we came in. I was too busy rehearsing how I'd react if my dad yelled or cried or begged us to leave. But Noah, in his small, curious way, had come prepared for something else entirely. He took out a tiny silver keychain, dull, scratched, and a little bent. It was shaped like a horse. It didn't look like much. But the moment he held it up in his little palm, I felt the world shift. He walked over to my father's hospital tray and gently set it down. "Grandpa," he said, "you dropped this 3 years ago." That sentence, those 7 words. I watched my dad's face. At first, nothing. Then his eyes locked on the keychain. Something flickered behind them, something that hadn't been there when we walked in. Not anger, not frustration, recognition. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I was too busy trying to understand what was happening, because suddenly, everything changed. His posture, his eyes, his silence. It cracked, just for a second. And in that second, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: regret. My name is Sienna Blake. I'm a single mother, a nurse, and someone who spent most of her adult life trying to earn the approval of a man who rarely gave it. My father, Martin Blake, is a retired mechanic, sharp-minded, proud, the kind of man who believed in hard work, silence, and keeping emotions buried beneath a hardened shell. He never really understood me. I wasn't what he expected his only daughter to become. I didn't follow the plan. I married someone he didn't respect. I left that marriage after 4 years of pain and disappointment, and I chose to raise my son, Noah, on my own without looking back. He never forgave me for any of it. My mother, Joanna, was the only bridge between us. She had a quiet way of softening his sharp edges. She would say things like, "He means well," or "He just doesn't know how to say he loves you." And for a while, I believed her. But when she passed away 3 years ago, that bridge collapsed completely. I still remember the day of her funeral. It was a gray, windless afternoon. After the service, my father barely spoke to anyone. When I tried to talk to him, to offer some kind of shared comfort, he cut me off with a single line: "You chose your mess, Sienna. Don't bring it to my doorstep." I remember those words with painful clarity. They weren't shouted. He didn't raise his voice. That made them hit harder. That was the last time we spoke. After that, I stopped trying. I focused on Noah. He became my center, my reason for holding it all together. Being a single parent isn't easy, but he made it feel worth every exhausting minute. He's the kind of kid who notices things most people miss. He watches, he remembers, he cares deeply, even when he doesn't fully understand what he's caring about. He would sometimes ask about Grandpa. I told him what I could without saying too much: that Grandpa lived alone, that he had a garage full of tools and used to build birdhouses for Grandma, that he loved classic trucks and always smelled like sawdust and coffee. Noah would nod and quietly draw pictures of old men in flannel shirts and label them Grandpa. Then one morning, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Carol, my dad's younger sister. She never called unless something was wrong. "He's in the hospital," she said. "Stroke. It wasn't a major one, but they're keeping him for observation. You should know." I didn't ask many questions. I just sat there holding the phone, staring at the floor while Noah played with his Legos in the next room. My first instinct was to say nothing, to leave the past buried. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the part of me that still held on to some sliver of hope, however small. That evening, I told Noah we were going to the hospital. "To see Grandpa?" he asked. I nodded. "He's not feeling well." He didn't ask why we hadn't seen him in so long. He didn't ask if Grandpa missed us. He just smiled and said, "I want to show him something." He ran off to his room before I could ask what it was. I heard him rummaging through his drawers, then the sound of his dinosaur toy box opening. When he came back out, his hands were empty. I assumed he'd changed his mind or forgotten. I didn't press it. I was too busy preparing for whatever emotional storm was waiting for me behind those hospital doors. The next morning, we drove across town in silence. Noah looked out the window, humming softly to himself. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. I kept playing out every possible scenario in my head. What if he yelled at me? What if he told us to leave? What if he looked at my son and saw nothing at all? I told myself to stay calm, to keep my heart sealed up tight. I reminded myself that I was doing this for Noah, not for some fairy tale ending. I didn't expect kindness or warmth. I didn't expect healing. But I should have known better than to underestimate the quiet power of a child who still believes in broken things being fixed. The hospital lobby was cold in that overly sanitized way, with 2 white walls and a faint smell of disinfectant and overbrewed coffee. I checked in at the front desk and held Noah's hand as we walked down a long hallway. The closer we got to my father's room, the more pressure I felt in my chest. It was the kind of weight that builds slowly like a dam about to crack. Noah skipped a little beside me. He had no idea how heavy that walk was for me. I admired him for that. He didn't carry the things I did. He didn't know about the silence between my father and me, or the words never said, or the things we lost the day my mother died. He was just excited to meet his grandpa. When we reached room 214, I stopped outside the door for a moment. I could hear the faint sound of a news anchor on TV. I took a breath and pushed it open. My dad was sitting upright in bed, his arms crossed over his chest, remote in hand. He looked thinner, paler than I remembered. The gray in his beard was more pronounced, his hands slightly trembling as he adjusted the blanket. But his eyes were sharp, alert. And when he turned to look at me, there was no confusion in them, just silence. "Hi, Dad," I said quietly. He stared at me for one long second, then turned back to the TV. No reaction, no expression, nothing. Noah peeked around my leg. "Hi, Grandpa." Still nothing. Not a smile, not a blink, not even the briefest glance at my son. I stood there, frozen, unsure what to do. I had prepared myself for tension. I had braced for harsh words, or maybe a dismissive comment, but I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected him to act like we weren't even standing there. I stepped closer, trying to break the fog. "I heard you had a stroke. We came to check on you, just wanted to see how you were doing." He didn't answer, didn't acknowledge me. His eyes stayed glued to the TV. Noah let go of my hand and walked to the edge of the hospital bed. His tiny fingers curled around the metal rail. He tilted his head and looked up at my father with curiosity and something that looked a lot like hope. "I brought something," Noah said. I looked down at him, confused. I didn't know what he meant. He hadn't told me he brought anything. My father didn't turn toward him. I could feel my pulse pounding behind my ears. The silence was unbearable. I tried to say something, anything that might break through. Nothing came out. My throat felt tight, like it was being clenched by a fist I couldn't see. It wasn't just that he ignored me. It was the way he ignored Noah. He had never made the effort to meet his grandson, never sent a birthday card, never asked for a photo. And now, when the opportunity stood right in front of him in the form of a sweet, open-hearted little boy offering kindness, he did nothing. I sat down in the chair beside the bed, more to stop myself from collapsing than to get comfortable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him what it was all for, why he pushed everyone away, why he couldn't even pretend to care about the only piece of his daughter he hadn't already lost. But I didn't say anything. I just sat there, feeling like a guest in a place I never should have come to. Noah leaned closer to my dad's tray table. His voice was soft, not sad, not angry, just matter of fact. "You used to drive a red truck, right?" That got a flicker of movement from my father. His eyes shifted slightly, almost toward Noah. Almost. "You came to our house once," Noah continued. "I think you dropped something." My heart stopped. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver keychain. It looked so small in his hand, almost like a toy. He placed it gently on the tray beside the untouched glass of water. "Grandpa," he said, "you dropped this 3 years ago." And that was when the silence changed, not because anyone spoke, but because suddenly it was filled with something new, recognition. For a moment, my father didn't move. He stared at the small silver horse like he didn't know what it was, but I could see in his face that he did. I remembered it from when I was a little girl. It used to hang from the key ring of his red Chevy truck. I hadn't seen it since the day of my mother's funeral. That was the day he stormed out of my house and never came back. I never thought I'd see that keychain again. I had no idea Noah had been holding on to it all this time. He must have picked it up from the driveway that day, tucked it away somewhere only a 6-year-old would think to keep something so small and forgotten. I had asked him before if he remembered my dad being there that day, and he just shook his head. But clearly, he did. Not the words, not the shouting, but something about that moment had stayed with him, and now he was standing in front of the man who had turned his back on both of us, offering him a piece of the past with no expectation and no resentment, just a quiet sense of trust that this small object still mattered. My father's hand twitched, not from the stroke, but from something else, emotion, memory, maybe guilt. I leaned forward slightly in the chair, not to push or explain, but just to be ready in case something changed. I didn't want Noah to feel like he had done something wrong. He had done something incredibly brave, and I needed him to know that, no matter how my father responded. Noah stepped back after placing the keychain down. He didn't say anything else. He just looked up at my dad with the kind of open heart only a child can have. My father finally reached for the keychain. His hand trembled as he picked it up. He held it between his fingers, turning it over slowly. His eyes didn't leave it. For a long time, he just stared. I could see the tightness in his jaw. The lines around his mouth deepened like he was fighting something inside. Something old, something heavy. He didn't look at me, but he finally spoke. "Where did you get this?" Noah answered him without hesitation. "You dropped it, at our house. I kept it safe." My father swallowed hard. His voice came again, lower, rougher. "You kept it all this time?" Noah nodded. "Yeah. Mom said it was yours. I thought maybe you'd want it back." I waited for my father to speak again, but instead, he looked up at Noah. Really looked at him. For the first time. His expression softened in a way I hadn't seen since before my mother got sick. There was something fragile in his eyes now, like the walls he'd built so carefully around himself were starting to splinter. He turned to me, slowly, as if it hurt more to face me than it did to speak. His mouth opened slightly and he let out a long, shaky breath. "I thought I lost this." His voice cracked as he said it. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, worn down by something that had gone unspoken for far too long. I could feel the lump rising in my throat, but I kept my face steady. I didn't want to interrupt whatever this moment was becoming. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. He looked at the keychain again, then back at Noah. "Thank you." 2 words, but they landed like a weight inside the room. They weren't just for the keychain. They were for being seen, for being remembered, for not being forgotten despite all the ways he had tried to disappear from our lives. I nodded at Noah, who smiled without saying anything. My father looked back at me, this time with less steel in his eyes. "I didn't think you'd come." I paused for a moment, then answered honestly. "I didn't think I would either, but he wanted to meet you." We sat in that room together, the 3 of us, with no more explanations and no more rehearsed speeches, just a tiny metal horse on a scratched hospital tray and the quiet beginning of something I never expected to find again. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the start of something like it. My father's hand stayed resting on the keychain like he wasn't ready to let it go. He held it the way someone holds a photograph they thought they had lost forever. Not tightly, but with care, like he was afraid it might disappear if he blinked. I watched him try to form words, but they kept slipping away before they reached his mouth. For so long, I imagined this moment happening differently. I thought maybe he'd argue with me, tell me I'd misunderstood him. Maybe he'd deny ever turning his back on us. I never expected this silence, not this quiet ache, not this hesitation, as if speaking too soon would shatter something delicate between us. Noah sat down in the chair next to mine. He looked up at my father and smiled, like nothing was wrong at all, like the man in that bed hadn't ignored us completely just 10 minutes earlier. Children have a way of skipping past what hurts. They leap straight into love, no questions asked. My father reached out with his free hand and placed it gently on the side of Noah's head. His fingers brushed the curls behind my son's ear. It was the smallest gesture, but my entire body tensed when I saw it. That one touch said everything he hadn't yet figured out how to say. Noah leaned into it without hesitation. "You look like your mom when she was your age," my father said. His voice was hoarse but steady. I froze. That sentence landed with more force than I was ready for. He hadn't said my name. He hadn't looked at me when he said it. But it was the first time he had acknowledged any part of me with warmth in years. Noah grinned. "She showed me pictures. You had a beard even back then." My father gave a weak smile. "Still do." There was a pause, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like something was being made room for. I shifted in my seat. "He's been asking about you for a long time." My dad nodded slowly. "I figured you'd moved on." "I tried," I said, "but Noah never let me forget. He kept asking if you were coming back, if you'd visit, if maybe you'd call." He looked down, ashamed. I didn't know what to say. After what I said to you that day, I wasn't proud of how I left. I could feel emotion creeping into my chest. I didn't want to cry, not now, not when I had spent years locking those feelings away. But hearing him say that, I wasn't proud. It pierced through everything I had been holding back. "I was angry," he continued. Your mom had just died, and I needed someone to blame. You were there, and I didn't know how to deal with losing her, so I made losing you feel like a choice, like it was something I controlled. I didn't say anything right away. There was nothing clever to say, nothing to fix it. I just let the words hang there. Noah looked between us. You're not mad anymore? My dad's voice cracked. No, son, I'm not mad. I watched my father reach across the tray and hold out the keychain to Noah. Thank you for keeping this safe. Noah took it, then hesitated. You can have it back now. My dad smiled, but he shook his head. Number. I think you should keep it. Looks like you've taken better care of it than I ever did. Noah beamed and clutched the tiny horse in his fist like it was made of gold. I saw it then, the moment something shifted in my father's face. He looked at Noah, but then his eyes moved to me. And for the first time in years, he didn't look through me. He looked at me. There was no speech, no dramatic apology, just a long, steady gaze that held weight. And in that look, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child standing in his garage, handing him a wrench and hoping he would say I'd done it right. I saw love, worn, imperfect, uncertain, but real. He cleared his throat. Would it be all right if you brought him back again sometime? I'd like to get to know him. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. Yeah, I'd like that. Something broke open in my chest. Not pain, not relief, just a deep, quiet sense that maybe, just maybe, we were finally finding our way back to each other. A few weeks passed and we went back to the hospital. This time, my dad was sitting in a wheelchair by the window when we walked in. The television was off, the tray was cleared. He was dressed in a sweater I recognized from years ago, one my mom had knitted. It was a small detail, but it mattered to me. It told me he was trying in his own way to come back from the place he had disappeared into. When Noah saw him, he ran straight over and started talking about everything. His new toy dinosaur, a bug he found in the backyard, and how he wanted to build a robot horse one day. My father listened to every word, not half listened, not nodded without hearing. He looked him in the eye, asked questions, laughed at the silly parts, and gave real answers to Noah's endless curiosity. It was the first time in years that I saw him as someone more than just the man who had hurt me. I saw him as a grandfather, maybe not the perfect one, not the warmest or the most expressive, but one who was present. After that visit, Noah asked if we could go again, and the time after that, it was my dad who asked the nurse to call me and invite us back. He was scheduled for rehab in a nearby facility, and he wanted to make sure we knew where to find him. We never talked about the years in between, not directly. There was no moment where we unpacked all the pain, but the healing didn't come from talking. It came from the quiet things. A shared meal from the hospital cafeteria. The way he started keeping a small notebook of questions Noah asked him so he could look up the answers later. The photo he asked me to print out and leave on his nightstand, it was one of all three of us taken during that second visit. Nothing posed, nothing perfect, just us. One night, after Noah went to bed, I sat in the kitchen and took out that keychain. Noah had given it back to me for safekeeping. He said, "Grandpa said it's mine, but I want you to hold it for both of us." I ran my fingers over the worn metal and thought about what it meant to carry something for someone else. To hold on to a small symbol of connection, even when everything else feels broken. My 6-year-old had done that without hesitation. He had carried a piece of my father for years, without knowing its full weight, and handed it back at the exact moment it mattered most. I used to think strength meant building walls, that if I could protect myself from disappointment, I wouldn't have to feel the sharp edge of rejection again. But Noah showed me something different. He taught me that sometimes strength looks like remembering, like keeping something safe, even when you don't understand why it matters, like believing in people before they've earned it. I didn't walk out of that hospital room with all the answers. There are still scars between me and my father, still spaces we haven't filled. But now there's also something else, a thread, a connection that didn't exist before. And it started with one small sentence from a 6-year-old. "Grandpa, you dropped this." That moment changed everything. It reminded my father who he used to be. It reminded me that healing doesn't always come in the way you expect. It sneaks in through the kindness of a child, through something as simple as an old keychain pulled from a pocket at exactly the right time. I used to carry pain. Now, I carry hope And if someone like my father, who held on to his silence for years, can be reached with nothing more than a memory offered with love, then maybe there's more possibility for change in this world than we give it credit for. Maybe we're all carrying something for someone else, waiting for the right moment to return it. If this story touched you, share it with someone you care about. Maybe it will remind them that even broken relationships can begin again, and that sometimes the smallest act of love can open the heaviest doors. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you've been distant from, or if it gave you a little hope that broken relationships can still find healing, then don't keep it to yourself, like the video if it moved you. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Comment below and tell me what part hit you the hardest, or share your own story. I read every single one. And if you want more true stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Thank you for watching, and thank you for feeling this story with me. I'll see you in the next one.